Like most of you, I spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to plan out exactly how I'm going to gear a new character, especially when a new patch is coming. So I've done this in the past. I'm doing it again this season. I actually do this every season. I've been doing this since like the beginning of Shadowlands, but more recently I've made these lists public for you guys to utilize. They're basically wish lists for the upcoming season. Now, I take into account typically when making these sheets that the average player might not raid, or at least might not raid at a mythic level. And if you don't raid at a mythic level, more often than not, the gear that you can craft or you'll get from dungeons are going to be a higher item level. If you're just like pugging heroic raid, unless there's very specific items like the rare rings that we saw from Vault of the Incarnates or specific trinkets, more often than not, you're just going to be doing Mythic Plus and going about your day. So that list was created in mind. So keep in mind that basically this list isn't necessarily perfect. If you're someone who does raid on a Mythic raid team, or you raid with a team in general, or you're allowed to raid on multiple characters, this list might be not necessarily the most accurate, but at least it gives you kind of a general sense of what you should be aiming for. So when you first get in, you'll see kind of the disclaimer and the read first just about the list. Also, my links are here if you'd like to support me in any way. But here's what the list looks like. I have it set up for all of the tanks. You can find the tabs down below. Again, they aren't perfect, but let's kind of walk through what they're doing. So I have a color coding system, kind of. Basically, these are the 4 best tier items that I think will be for each tank. Most tanks are going to be going after helms, shoulders, chests, and gloves. Outside of, I think the Brewmaster Monk will probably not use the helm, because the helm is like super heavy haste with mastery again, like we saw in Vault of the Incarnates. And again, those are our 2 worst stats by far. And we're already being forced to run heavy haste on other items, so we want to be careful of that. And then basically I've filled it in with what items I think will probably be targeted by most players. Now there are a few changes that we saw going into this season. Lariat was nerfed significantly, so there are some decent necklaces from some of these new dungeons. Vortex Pinnacle has a haste verse trinket that will be good for a lot of tanks. Oldemon, I think for the Protection Paladin, will have a haste mastery one, which will be good. And of course there is a crit verse one from Brackenhide for Brewmaster Monks. Because we're no longer kind of being forced into playing with Lariat, because of the nerfs, that opens up an embellishment slot for a lot of players. Now, that's not to say that Lariat won't be good, but the big change there was the secondary stat duration that you're going to get from Lariat will now be based on how many sockets you have of different elemental gems. Long story short, it won't be good until you have X amount of gems. So like if you need like at least probably 7 gem slots or 6 slots to make it viable. So with that change, we might be shifting to different embellished items that we might be running, whether that's like just embellishments being added to certain items or some of the new gear that's being added. The biggest thing I can probably think is for Protection Paladin. You'll probably still run the Frostfire Leg Guards, for example, but I'm thinking Shield of the Hearth might actually be pretty strong as well. This is a shield that gives you verse occasionally upon taking damage. Not a bad thing, especially because if you don't raid, almost every single shield gives crit verse. That drops from dungeons at least. You can always craft a shield with like haste mastery on it, for example, but if you have an open embellish slot, you might as well either play Shield of the Hearth or you'll just craft a regular shield, and then maybe you'll do like increased potion duration, for example. One other thing I want to note too, kind of moving down the list from necklace, is for most of the tanks, you're going to see me adding this cloak, Etchings of the Captive Revenant. This is a cloak from the first boss of the raid. It's haste verse, which is better for most tanks on average. But the reason for this is because if you look through the dungeon journal and all the new dungeons, it's crit mastery like down the board. Like there's like 6 new cloaks, but they're all crit mastery. Not the greatest stat combination for most tanks. Again, we have the option to catalyze that down the road, any of those cloaks, or what'll likely happen is you'll use one of your 5 crafted items to make a cloak. But for now, I just added it from the raid. It's from the first boss. It's easily puggable. Haste verse being haste heavy, typically good for most tanks outside of Brewmaster. Brewmaster, they have a crit verse cloak from actually Underrot, Spore Collar's Shroud. That is a typo. Spree Collar. Yikes. Spore Collar. I'm an idiot. That's all right. So yeah, I've gone through. Now, if you do happen to raid, I did add a list of weapons and trinkets and some unique items from the raid that might be useful to try to get if you raid with like a regular raid team. Now, for me personally, I don't raid on all my tanks, at least usually. I'll typically play whatever is going to be best for the raid composition. So if we don't have a warrior, I'll play warrior for attack power. If we don't have a Windwalker or a Mistweaver, I'll play Brewmaster for the buff. But typically, once I kind of solidify on a tank, I typically will play that, or a class, I will play that all season, or try to. So if that's the case, you know, this weapon might be really good compared to, you know, just dual wielding. This Pillar of the Elder Flame, it's a rare drop from, I think, like the 6th boss of the raid or 5th boss of the raid. Really, really, really strong. It's an on-use effect that does like insane AoE fire cleave damage to everything in front of you whenever you use like a melee ability. But again, if you don't raid, it's going to be kind of hard to chase an item because not only is it deep within the raid, so it's going to be hard to pug it on Mythic. It's not only a rare drop, but you have to do that every week, where it might just be better and might save your sanity if you just get the regular Sentinel's Battle Lance from Olamon, for example, for Guardian Druid. There's also some good trinkets from the raid that aren't necessarily going to be available for Mythic Plus, obviously. Now, it might be worth trying to pug. Some of these are pretty deep, though. Screaming Black Dragon Scale does come from the first boss. It is a rare drop, though, similar to Icon and the rings from Vault of the Incarnates. You also have things like Neltharian's Call to Suffering, or Chaos, or Dominance, which are the 3 kind of like major class-specific trinkets. These are going to be really cool and really strong, but again, they're from Neltharion, who's the penultimate boss. So again, if you're not Mythic raiding, or if you're not in a consistent heroic AOTC guild that's clearing it every week, it might be a little bit more difficult to pug into this, especially early on. And same with Beacon from Beyond, last boss, Voice of the Violent Star, which is a really cool cloak. Doesn't come from early bosses, it comes from the last boss of the tier, and it's a rare item, so to get it to drop, again, it's going to take a lot of work or a lot of effort if you don't have a raid team. So that's why my lists are pretty dungeon focused, and I left out crafted gear because really crafted gear is meant to act as 1, bad luck protection, or 2, for players who really want to start to like perfectly itemize their character. You can typically get away with just running your standard dungeon loot and without crafting at all, but crafting allows players, especially once you kind of get to kind of end game and you have most items, it really starts to let you tweak stats. Like, let's just say you went over your diminishing return for crit or verse as a brewmaster, you can kind of start shifting that into mastery, or as a guardian druid, you can start shifting it into, you know, mastery as well, or paladin. I don't know, it really depends. But let's just say you went way over your haste cap, you can start kind of bringing that stat down to amplify your mastery a little bit more, or giving yourself more verse. And that's really the point of this list, is to kind of have an idea of what to target, and then later on you can kind of fine tune it yourself based off of either, you know, what content creators are doing, what people on the ladder are doing, or off of your own knowledge and merit. So if there's anything crazy wrong with this list, let me know. I think I got it mostly right. Some of the things that I'm not super aware of are some of the stat priorities. I don't know what some of the breakpoints are. From my understanding, Blood DK typically would only target 20% haste, but with the new tier set and kind of the build they're going for, I think you're going to go higher than this. The reason you would play only 20% haste is because you were getting haste amps from having Bone Shield active plus being in your Death and Decay, so there's no need to go higher. They're typically a pretty haste-centric tank, so I think that's going to go up again, but I'm not sure. If anything is crazy wrong, if you're looking through this, let me know. I'll update it as soon as I can, once I can verify the information, but this is from what I typically will understand. And and also this is generally like when you're going to be around 430 to 440 item level. So if you see like these numbers being like crazy high, like 35% haste on the VDH, or this will probably end up changing to 39. You'll probably try to get to as close to cap as possible. This isn't at, you know, 420. This is at 440. I hope this list provides to be somewhat useful to you guys. Again, thank you Patreons, thank you Twitch supporters, and I will catch you guys all very soon. Peace.